The things she doesn't mean to reveal. Most people imagine attraction as something obvious, a confession, a compliment, a clear signal that leaves no room for doubt. Real life rarely works that way. Most attraction begins quietly, especially in the early stages when someone is still figuring out what they feel. Before she tells her friends about you, before she decides whether pursuing anything is a good idea, before she even fully understands why you're on her mind more than other people, her behavior often starts changing in ways she doesn't consciously plan. That's why so many men miss genuine interest while simultaneously convincing themselves that obvious disinterest is actually hidden attraction. They're looking for dramatic gestures, while the real clues are usually buried inside ordinary interactions. The truth is that people reveal what captures their attention long before they reveal what captures their heart. You see it in the extra seconds they stay in a conversation. You see it in the way they remember things they had no obligation to remember. You see it in the small moments where their focus keeps drifting back toward the same person without any obvious reason. Attraction isn't always a deliberate performance. Often, it's a collection of unconscious behaviors that slip through before logic has a chance to organize them. Part of what makes this confusing is that women are not all the same. One woman becomes talkative when she likes someone. Another becomes nervous and quieter. One creates opportunities to spend time together. Another waits for him to make the first move because she's afraid of appearing too interested. This is why looking for a single, universal sign almost always leads men in the wrong direction. Human beings are far too complicated for that. What matters isn't one isolated behavior. What matters is a pattern of behaviors that all point in the same direction. Imagine somebody who consistently remembers details about you, finds reasons to continue conversations, becomes unusually engaged when you're around, and shows curiosity about your life. Any one of those things by itself might mean nothing. Together, they start painting a picture. That's how attraction usually works. Not through one giant clue, but through dozens of smaller clues that begin stacking on top of each other. The mistake many men make is becoming obsessed with decoding every text message, every smile, every glance. Meanwhile, they're ignoring the overall pattern sitting right in front of them. Attraction is rarely hidden perfectly because attention is difficult to hide. When someone is genuinely interested, their focus naturally starts moving toward you more often than it moves toward everyone else. There's another reason these signs matter. They reveal something deeper than simple flirtation. Flirting can be intentional. People flirt for entertainment, validation, boredom, confidence boosts, or because they're naturally playful. The behaviors we're talking about today tend to come from somewhere more instinctive. They're often happening before she has made a conscious decision about what she wants. That's what makes them so interesting. They're less about strategy and more about attention. Less about what she thinks she should do and more about what she's naturally drawn toward doing. The woman who secretly likes you isn't necessarily sitting at home planning every interaction. More often, she simply finds herself becoming interested in things that involve you. She finds herself paying attention without meaning to. She finds herself remembering things she wasn't trying to memorize. She finds herself enjoying conversations that somehow last longer than expected. None of this guarantees attraction on its own. Nothing ever does. But when these patterns begin appearing consistently, they often reveal what words have not revealed yet. And the first place that usually shows up is in the way she starts finding reasons to bring you into parts of her day that never actually required your involvement in the first place. She starts bringing you into conversations that didn't need you one. One of the earliest signs that you're occupying more space in her mind than she realizes is surprisingly simple. She starts finding reasons to involve you in moments that could have easily happened without you. Not because she desperately needs your help. Not because the situation requires your opinion. Not because you're the only person who could answer the question. She just keeps pulling you into her day. Maybe she sends you a picture of something funny she saw on her way to work. Maybe she asks what restaurant you would choose between two options. even though she has already decided where she's going. Maybe she messages you about a movie she just watched, a random thought that crossed her mind, or a small inconvenience that happened during her afternoon. On the surface, these interactions look ordinary. That's exactly why men often overlook them. They assume attraction should look more dramatic than this. But think about what is actually happening. Out of all the people she could have shared that moment with, she chose you. Out of all the conversations she could have started, she started one with you. The content itself isn't always important. The fact that she wanted to create contact is what matters. Attraction often doesn't begin with a desire for romance. It begins with a desire for connection. She wants you included in experiences that technically have nothing to do with you, because somewhere beneath the surface, your presence has started becoming enjoyable in its own right. What's interesting is that these conversations often have a quality that feels slightly unnecessary from a practical standpoint. If she asks where the nearest gas station is, that's a practical question. If she sends a picture of a dog she saw and says, "This somehow reminded me of you," practicality has left the building entirely. That's where things become revealing. Human beings invest attention where emotional interest exists. When someone likes you, they naturally begin creating tiny bridges between their world and yours. They don't always do this consciously. In fact, most of the time they don't. They simply feel an urge to share things. A song comes on in the car and she wonders if you'd like it. She hears a joke and immediately thinks about your reaction. She comes across a topic the two of you discussed weeks ago and suddenly feels like sending it to you. Notice how different this is from somebody who is merely being polite. Polite people respond when conversations happen. Interested people create conversations when there wasn't one to begin with. That's a massive distinction. One is participation. The other is initiation. One maintains contact. The other actively seeks it. When a woman repeatedly finds excuses to pull you into moments that never required your involvement, she's often revealing something important without realizing she's revealing anything at all. The reason this behavior matters so much is because attraction changes what feels relevant. Imagine two people experiencing the exact same day. One woman sees something amusing and immediately forgets about it. Another woman sees the same thing and thinks, "I should send this to him." That second reaction tells you something. It tells you that you were already present in her thoughts before the message was sent. People don't randomly become recurring characters in someone else's mental world. That happens through emotional investment. The more interested she becomes, the more naturally she starts connecting everyday experiences back to you. And the most revealing part is that these interactions often continue even when there's no clear reward attached to them. She's not necessarily trying to get a date. She's not always trying to impress you. Sometimes she simply enjoys the feeling of sharing things with you. She likes seeing your response. She likes hearing your perspective. She likes having a reason to interact. That's why these small conversations can become one of the strongest indicators of hidden attraction. Not because any individual message proves anything, but because the pattern reveals a growing desire to keep you involved in her life. And once that starts happening, another interesting shift often appears. She begins paying attention to details about you that most people would forget almost immediately. She notices small details other people miss. One of the most reliable ways to tell when someone is becoming emotionally interested in you is to watch what they remember. Most conversations disappear from people's minds almost as quickly as they happen. Think about how many interactions you have in a normal week. Most of them leave very little behind. Someone mentions a hobby, a favorite restaurant, a story from childhood, and within a few days, you've forgotten most of it. That's normal. Human attention is selective. It naturally filters out information that doesn't feel important. But attraction changes that process. Suddenly, details start sticking. Not because she's making an effort to memorize them, but because her mind is assigning more value to information connected to you. You casually mention that you hate olives on pizza. 3 weeks later, she remembers. You tell a quick story about your grandfather during a conversation that seemed completely ordinary. A month later, she brings it up again. You mention an important meeting at work that most people would immediately forget, and she follows up later to ask how it went. These moments often surprise men because they seem too small to matter. Yet that's exactly why they matter. Nobody has to remember these things. There is no social obligation requiring that level of attention. This becomes even more noticeable when the details are visual rather than verbal. Maybe you get a haircut and she notices immediately, while several other people don't say a word. Maybe you start wearing a different watch, change your beard slightly, switch your usual order at a restaurant, or show up in a shirt you've never worn before. These aren't dramatic transformations. They're the kind of changes many people overlook entirely. Yet someone who is paying close attention often catches them surprisingly fast. What makes this interesting isn't the observation itself, it's what the observation reveals. To notice change, a person first has to be familiar with the baseline. She has to know what is normal for you before she can recognize what's different. That's where attraction quietly enters the picture. The more attention someone gives you, the more detailed their mental picture of you becomes. They start recognizing patterns. They notice habits. They remember preferences. They become aware of things that would never register with a casual acquaintance. And the fascinating part is that most of this happens automatically. She isn't conducting research. She isn't keeping notes. Her attention is simply landing on you more often than it lands on other people. And as a result, information about you begins accumulating in her memory without much effort. What many men misunderstand is that attraction isn't always revealed through grand gestures of affection. Often, it's revealed through unusually consistent attention. A woman can compliment you once and mean very little by it. She can flirt once and simply be in a playful mood. But when she keeps remembering the little things, that's harder to fake because it requires ongoing interest. Attention is one of the most valuable things people give away. Time passes, conversations happen, life gets busy, and yet somehow details about you keep surviving inside her memory. That usually doesn't happen by accident. It happens because your words carry a little more weight than other people's words. Your experiences feel a little more interesting. Your stories stay with her a little longer. And while she may not consciously recognize what is happening, her behavior often exposes it. She remembers because she was paying attention. She was paying attention because she was interested. And once that interest starts growing, another subtle shift often appears. It's no longer just the details she notices. The entire energy of her interactions with you begins feeling slightly different from the energy she gives everyone else around her. Her reactions to you become slightly different from everyone else's. One of the biggest mistakes men make when trying to figure out whether a woman likes them is focusing only on what she does instead of paying attention to how she does it. The difference matters because attraction often shows up less in specific actions and more in subtle shifts of energy. A woman who secretly likes you may not openly flirt. She may not compliment you constantly. She may not make some bold move that removes all uncertainty. What often changes first is the way she reacts when you're involved. The same joke that gets a polite smile from everyone else gets a genuine laugh from her. The same story that barely holds another person's attention somehow keeps her fully engaged. The same conversation that should have ended 5 minutes ago keeps finding new life when the two of you are talking. If you only examine isolated moments, none of this looks significant. But when you step back and compare her interactions with you to her interactions with everyone else, a pattern sometimes becomes impossible to ignore. She isn't necessarily treating you dramatically differently, she's treating you consistently differently. And that consistency is where the real clue lives. You might notice this when you're in a group setting. Watch how people distribute their attention. Most individuals spread it around fairly evenly. They listen, respond, move on, and engage with whoever happens to be speaking. But a woman who is developing interest often has a tendency to gravitate back toward one person without fully realizing she's doing it. Maybe she makes a comment to the group, but glances toward you to see your reaction first. Maybe she tells a story and seems particularly interested in whether you find it funny. Maybe the conversation moves across several topics, yet somehow she keeps pulling you back into the exchange. These behaviors can be incredibly subtle. In fact, that's what makes them valuable. They usually aren't rehearsed. They're not part of a strategy. They're often the natural result of caring a little more about your response than everyone else's response. Human beings instinctively seek feedback from people who matter to them. We want their approval, their laughter, their attention, their opinion. So when a woman repeatedly checks in with you during conversations, even in small ways, she may be revealing where her attention is naturally settling. Another thing that often changes is patience. This is one of the least discussed signs of attraction, yet it's remarkably revealing. When someone isn't particularly interested in you, their tolerance for your flaws tends to be average. If you're late replying, they move on. If you tell a long story, they lose interest. If you make a joke that doesn't land, the moment passes. But when attraction enters the picture, people often become more generous with their attention. They give conversations extra time. They forgive awkward moments more easily. They stay engaged longer than logic would suggest. That's because attraction creates a kind of emotional curiosity. She wants to keep learning about you, so minor inconveniences feel less inconvenient. Small imperfections become easier to overlook. Moments that would normally end an interaction don't necessarily end this one. This doesn't mean she'll tolerate anything or excuse bad behavior. It simply means she's more willing to stay in the conversation because the conversation involves you. And when that happens consistently, something else often begins happening too. She starts looking for ways to make sure these interactions don't remain isolated moments. Instead of simply enjoying your presence now, she begins creating opportunities for your presence later. She creates opportunities for future interaction. One of the clearest signs that a woman secretly likes you is that she starts treating the current conversation as if another one is already coming. Most casual interactions exist entirely in the present. You talk, the conversation ends, and both people move on with their lives. There's no assumption of continuation because neither person is particularly invested in continuing it. But attraction often changes the way someone thinks about time. Instead of focusing only on the moment they're currently sharing with you, she starts leaving little threads that connect today's interaction to a future one. Maybe you're talking about movies, and she casually says, "You'll have to tell me what you think when that new one comes out next month." Maybe a conversation about food turns into her mentioning a restaurant she's been wanting to try. Maybe you discuss a topic neither of you fully understands, and she jokes that you'll both need to revisit it later when you've done more research. None of these things sound like dramatic invitations. That's because they usually aren't. They're often much more subtle than that. What makes them interesting is the underlying assumption that the connection will continue. Without consciously deciding to do it, she's creating reasons for the two of you to cross paths again. This behavior becomes especially noticeable because it often happens in situations where there was no need to mention the future at all. Think about how many conversations naturally end without extending beyond the present moment. Most people don't actively build bridges into future interactions unless they have some reason to want those interactions to happen. When a woman likes you, she often starts planting those bridges almost automatically. She references upcoming events. She mentions plans that haven't happened yet. She brings up things she'll need to show you later. She talks about experiences that remind her of conversations the two of you had previously. The important thing here isn't whether every comment is secretly an invitation. Sometimes it isn't. The important thing is that her mind keeps including you in situations that haven't happened yet. That reveals something deeper than simple friendliness. It reveals anticipation. And anticipation is difficult to manufacture when genuine interest isn't present. People naturally imagine future interactions with individuals they enjoy having around. They don't have to force it. Their minds simply start making room for that person in moments that haven't arrived yet. What's fascinating is that these future-oriented comments often happen before she has fully acknowledged her feelings to herself. Attraction doesn't always arrive with complete self-awareness. Sometimes a woman notices she enjoys talking to you. Then she notices she's looking forward to talking to you again. Then she notices she's disappointed when opportunities to interact don't happen. The emotional realization often arrives after the behavioral clues have already been showing up for weeks. That's why these small references to the future can be so revealing. They suggest that your presence has moved beyond being merely enjoyable in the moment. You've become someone she expects, hopes, or wants to encounter again. And when that starts happening, another shift often follows naturally. She becomes interested in parts of your life that have nothing to do with her. The conversation stops being about shared situations and starts becoming about understanding who you actually are when she's not around. She becomes curious about parts of your life that don't directly affect her. One of the strongest indicators of growing attraction is curiosity. Not the surface-level curiosity people show out of politeness, but the kind that keeps digging a little deeper, even when there is no practical reason to do so. Most conversations between casual acquaintances stay focused on whatever is immediately relevant. Work, school, mutual friends, current events, everyday activities. The interaction stays comfortably on the surface because neither person feels a strong need to explore beyond it. But when a woman secretly likes you, something often changes. She becomes interested in areas of your life that have no direct impact on her whatsoever. She wants to know what motivates you. She becomes curious about what occupies your time when she's not around. She asks about goals you mentioned briefly weeks ago. She wonders how certain situations in your life turned out. She remembers stories and follows up on them later. Notice how different this is from making conversation simply to avoid silence. This is curiosity with direction. Her questions aren't just keeping the discussion alive. They're helping her build a more complete picture of who you are. The more interested she becomes, the less satisfied she is with knowing only the version of you that appears during your interactions together. This is where attraction often moves beyond simple enjoyment and starts becoming genuine interest in the person himself. She doesn't just enjoy talking to you, she wants to understand you. She wants to know why you think the way you do. She becomes interested in your opinions, even when the topic has nothing to do with her own life. She asks how you arrived at certain decisions. She wonders what your plans are for the future. She becomes curious about childhood experiences, family relationships, personal ambitions, and lessons you've learned along the way. These aren't always deep, intense conversations. Sometimes they emerge gradually through dozens of ordinary interactions. One question leads to another. One story sparks a new area of interest. Before long, she knows far more about your life than someone would normally learn through casual conversation. The important thing isn't the specific questions themselves, it's the pattern behind them. She's investing attention in information that offers her no immediate reward. She isn't gathering facts because she needs them. She's gathering them because understanding you has become interesting to her. What makes this sign particularly powerful is that curiosity is difficult to fake over long periods of time. People can pretend to be interested briefly. They can ask a few questions to appear engaged. But sustained curiosity requires genuine investment. It requires remembering previous conversations, connecting different pieces of information, and continuing to care about the answers. That's why this behavior often reveals more than obvious flirting ever could. Flirting can be playful. Flirting can be casual. Flirting can happen without much emotional involvement. Genuine curiosity usually points to something deeper. It suggests that you're becoming more than just an enjoyable interaction. You're becoming someone she wants to understand, someone she finds mentally and emotionally engaging. Someone who occupies enough space in her thoughts that learning more about him feels naturally rewarding. And when you step back and look at all the signs together, the unnecessary conversations, the remembered details, the different reactions, the future-oriented comments, and the growing curiosity, you start to see a pattern emerge. Not a guarantee, not proof, but a pattern that often reveals attraction long before attraction is ever spoken aloud.